Welcome back, students. Like I said in my previous video, our next video is going to focus on ledger accounts. Now, for those who weren't in class and for those who were in class, this will assist you. Now, what is ledger accounts and what is an integrated ledger system? An integrated ledger system is when you use one ledger for your factory items and for your office items. So all ledger accounts appear in one general ledger. There's no separate ledger for factory and office item. Every transaction has two accounts. For every debit, there must be a credit. Now, when you do the ledger accounts, it's very important that you do footnotes. And this hints and tips will first assist you in doing the footnotes before you commence doing the ledgers. You must establish if the ledger is done for the whole financial year or for a certain time period, like 1 month or 2 months. If it's done for the whole financial year, you must then establish the beginning and the end of the financial year. Depreciation. Is depreciation given or must it be calculated? And when you do the ledger accounts, it's depreciation for office items and depreciation for factory items. Applied overheads, must it be calculated or is it given? Then you read the contents of the question. Now, in total, there are 8 ledger accounts. And like I said in class, the first, you need to do it in the order you've been told, even if they don't ask you in that order. Even if they exclude certain accounts, you still do it as these ledger accounts impact all of them. For example, the first one you do is material. The second one you do is the labor control account. The third one you do is MOH. The fourth one is production control, also known as manufacturing control. Then you have the finished goods. Then you have the cost of sales. Then you have the trading account and last, profit or loss. Now, if you do not do it in this sequence, you can easily get lost as these accounts impact, like the first 3 accounts impact number 4. Number 4 affects number 5, number 5, number 6. Something in 6 goes in 7 and something in 7 goes in 8. So I'm going to focus on the layout now, which I have sent to you. Now, this is how the layout looks. It says there, layout ledger account. The first, now this is what you got to remember. Every transaction has 2 accounts. For every debit, there must be a credit. The following accounts has opening balance. Now, they will always give you the opening balances for these 3 accounts: material control, production control, and finished goods. The opening balance, which will either be at the start of the financial year if you're doing it for 12 months, or at the start of the month if you're doing the books for 1 month. The opening balance will go on the debit side and it will be called balance brought down. The closing balance will go on the credit side and it will be called balance carried down. They will always give you the opening balances for these 3 accounts, but they might not necessarily give you the closing balances, or sometimes it needs to be calculated. To balance these accounts, you always need to compare the debit side with the credit side. You need to read first, then you need to create footnotes, and then identify into which accounts the item goes in first. Then you actually do the accounts. The first account we're going to focus on is the material control account. Now, you can remember in chapter 1, when we had to work out material used or issued. Now, those same items you use there, you're going to use here. Now, firstly, material account consists of direct and indirect material. This account has a debit side and it has a credit side, as well as it has an opening balance and a closing balance. Now, what goes on the debit side? Your opening balance at the start of the financial year or at the beginning of the month. When you buy material cash, you don't call it purchases, but you call it bank. When you buy material on account, you don't call it purchases, you call it creditors control. And then you have items like import duties, carriage on purchases, import taxes, railage, and custom duties. So let's just have a look at our debit side. This is how our debit side looks. Balance drawdown, bank, when you buy cash, material cash. Creditors control, when you buy material on account. Carriage on purchases, import duties, railage, and custom duties. That's your debit side. Now, the storeroom buys material, they buy it to issue it to the factory. When they issue material, there's two types of material they can issue, direct and indirect. If they issue direct material, they call it production control. Now, sometimes they give you this amount, or sometimes they need to calculate it. So there is our direct material issued. Manufacturing always. What happens when they issue indirect material? We also put it on the credit side, but we call it manufacturing overheads. Now, as you can see, I already put the three items that normally appears on the credit side. Your direct material, which is called production control, your indirect material, which is called manufacturing overheads, and the balance carried out. Because if there's an opening balance, there must be a closing balance. So that means I have given you now two of the three amounts. Now I want you to remember this. If there's three amounts on the credit side or three items, they will give you two. You can never work out more than one amount. In this case, you must work out the balance carried out. So what do? You compare the debit side versus the credit side. So the debit side is 368, the credit side is 70. So I will put 368 there as well as there. If you add that up, that gives you 70. So what do? I take 368 minus 70, and my balance carried down will be 298. That means I bring the 298 to my debit side. In this scenario, my debit side is still 368, but my credit side is 338. That means you must work out the MOH amount. So 338 minus 368 will give me 30,000. So my MOH will be 30,000. What happens in this scenario? That means you must work out the amount that must go there for direct material. So my debit side is still 368, but my credit side is now 328. So that means my 40,000 will go there. But now what happens in this scenario? They give you one amount, two is missing. That means MOH will be null because you can never work out more than one amount. So what is that? My debit side is 368. My credit side will be 40. And my balance carried down will be 328. So what you can do when you get a material account, you can put three items down there: production control, MOH, and balance carried down. If you see this, then you must know there is no indirect material issued, because if you have an opening balance, there must be a closing balance. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is your material control account. Like I said, there will be three items, but they will, if there's three items, they will always give you the two amounts. If they only give you one amount, then one of these is not included, and it's normally MOH. We're now going to look at the labor control account. It has no opening balance and no closing balance. It consists of direct, indirect, and non-manufacturing wages and salary. Now, most of the time, they will give you the direct and indirect, and then there won't be any non-manufacturing. But if they do get you non-manufacturing, it also goes in this account. It has a debit side and a credit side. The account always balances off. Now, you always do the credit side first. Now, in the activity, they call it direct labor or factory employees' wages or production employees' wages. That's the same. But you don't call it direct labor, you call it production control. Indirect labor in the activity, they will call it indirect labor or supervisor salary or plant manager salary. When you take it to the labor account credit side, you call it manufacturing overheads. If they give you non-manufacturing wages or salaries, that's some wages and salaries they pay to the people in the office, it's just called non-manufacturing wages and salaries. So let's look at it. There's my direct labor, but I call it production control. There's my indirect labor, I call it MOH, and there's my non-manufacturing wages. So I always do my credit side first. Now, what goes on the debit side? When the people work for you, your employers, you need to pay them. So we call it bank and bank. So 100,000, so I call it bank 100,000. 50,000 there, so I call it 50,000 here. 150,000 there also becomes 150,000. If you look at your debit side, it's 300,000 and your credit side is 300,000. The next account we're going to look at is MOH. No opening balances, no closing balances. It has a debit side and the credit side. In this account, when you entered all the transaction, you compare the debit side to the credit side. If there is a difference, if the debit side is more than the credit side, then on the credit side, you will put cost of sales and the difference in the amount. If the credit side is more than the debit side, then cost of sales will go to the debit side. But if the debit side and the credit side is the same, then there's no cost of sales. This account always balances off. What do you put on the debit side? Your actual MOH expenses that you pay to run the factory. Now, remember, I've done 2 accounts before this. So I go and check. That's why you need to do it in this order. If you look at material control, there's MOH, 30,000. So this 30,000 will go to the debit side of MOH and you will call it material control because that's where you're getting the amount. Then if you look at labor, you'll see there's MOH, 50,000. So on the debit side of MOH, you put that 50,000 and you call it labor control. So now we look at our debit side. There's material control, 30,000. There's labor control. $50,000. Now on the debit side, you can see that all your actual MOH expenses go. Now you put in things like rent paid, water paid, insurance, depreciation, rates and taxes, and maintenance. That's the actual MOH expenses you pay to run the factory, and there's your debit side covered. Now what goes on the credit side? Applied MOH. Now, when you put your applied MOH on the credit side, we call it production control. And that's where we are, production control. So what do you do now? You compare the debit side versus the credit side. If you look at your debit side, it's 105,000. If you look at your credit side, it's 100,000. So I put 105,000 there as well as over there. So this 5,000 here will now go to the credit side, and I will call it cost of sales. If the credit side was 100,000, 105, and the debit 100,000, then this 5,000 will go onto the debit side, and we call it cost of sales. If both debit and credit side was 105, then there'll be no cost of sales included. Now we're going to the production control. Now in the production control, you need to calculate either what was the cost of finished goods produced, or you need to calculate a closing balance. Cost to produce finished goods is calculated. Sometimes the cost of finished goods produced is given. This account has an opening balance. Now, in the activity, they won't call it production control. They will call it work in process or work in progress or unfinished goods or semi-finished goods, and that is used as opening balance. If there's an opening balance, there must be a closing balance. Sometimes they will give you the closing balance. Sometimes you need to calculate it. Now, in the activities, they give you the opening balance for finished goods. Now, that is meant for the finished goods account. Now, sometimes students put that opening balance for finished goods in this account, and that's where they make a mistake. Now, if they give you the cost of finished goods produced for the financial year, they will put it in the activity. Now, what do you put on the debit side? Your opening balance. But now, if you look at it, we have done 3 accounts so far. We've done the material account. And if I look at it, there's production control. So on the debit side of production control, I will put that 40,000 and I will call it material control. If I look at my labor control, there's production control appearing and it's 100,000. So when I go to production control, I put there 100,000 and I put there labor control. If I look at MOH, there's production control appearing 100,000. So on the debit side of production control, I will put that there and I will call it manufacturing overheads. So this is how my production control account is looking at the moment. There's my opening balance. There's my material control. There's my labor control. There's my MOH. Now there are 4 amounts and 4 items there. On my credit side, there will be 2 items, finished goods and balance carried out. And like I said, with material, you can never be asked to work out more than 1 amount. So they will either give you the finished goods amount or they will give you the balance carried down. Now, which one am I going to give you? I'm going to give you the finished goods amount. That means you must work out the closing balance. So what do? I take my debit side, which gives me 260, and I take my credit side, which gives me 250. So I will put 260 here on the debit as well as on the credit side. But if you add, there's only 250 there. So what do? I take my 260 minus my 250, and there is my balance carry down of 10,000. So there's it. Now what happens when they do this? That means you must work out the finished goods amount. Now I just want to take you here to activity 9 for those of you who've been here. This is activity 29. I was referring to this. This is the opening balances for these accounts for the material, production control, and finished goods. Now, sometimes students will take this 22,600, which is the opening balance for finished goods, and then they will use it in this account. That is not the case. If they give you the amount for finished goods, it will be amongst these transactions where it says summary of transactions, and they will put it amongst these items. It cannot be here because these are the opening balances for these various accounts. So now you must work out finished goods. So the credit side, debit side is 260 and the credit side is 10,000. So the finished goods will be 250,000. And I'm just going to put here finished goods. So there I will put 250,000. And that is my first 4 accounts. So you need to do activity 29, which we did in class, and activity 30. Now, activity 29, I'm first going to post the answers to the first 4 accounts. That is, these 4 accounts, 1, 2, 3, 4, as I covered that. In my next video, we're going to speak about finished goods, cost of sales, trading account, and profit or loss, as you have to do the answers to the rest of the accounts. So I will post the answers to these 4 accounts only.